I'm joined by Mr. Russell Grammer, founder and director of Prodigy Leadership Academy, as well as my mother-in-law, Jamie Reese. And this last year, she was awarded Teacher of the Year by the Herzog Foundation, Christian Teacher of the Year. So she was one of 12 from across the country. So we've got some heavy hitters in here today. So this is pretty exciting. Today, we're going to be discussing valuing each individual. And so that's the whole concept of this Prodigy Way book. We do education in a way that values the unique design of every child. We truly believe that that's how education should be. And so this is a big topic here. And I'm excited to dive into it with you guys.
If there's anything good that we do for a child, it has to be grounded in the idea that we're celebrating and valuing that child. I mean, if that young person knows that you are over the top with how much you think of them in a way that is important and top level, if that young person knows that that's how you see them, then I think we're giving a more accurate view of how God also sees them. And then I think we're also giving that child the foundation to know that everything can flow from that. Everything about you can flow from the fact that there's no one else like you, and you are more important than any of us we can't even think of how important you are. It's bigger than that. To me, if a young person knows that, and every interaction you have with that child portrays that, then think of how far they'll go. Because it's all true. You know, as the book points out in the chapter about valuing each individual, there are close to 8 billion people on the planet. And every single one of them is a miracle. And everyone is unique. Like, that's extraordinary. It's so cool.
And that's just the people alive right now. As Christians, we believe in a God who has the infinite capacity to create people who are unique, and that he can pay full attention to every single one of them, and that he has a vision and a plan. He knows our potential. And so by us valuing each individual, we're supporting that child on the journey towards the potential that only God can see, which is, I get chills thinking about it.
And I think it's like we can see potential in students and say, oh, you've got this great ability, I can see that. But it's also a matter of like believing the best in them and not coming with preconceived notions or things that prior teachers have experienced because they had them and they acted or did or performed or something this way, but having their uniqueness in mind of thinking, no, you can change, you can do this, you can do better, I'm going to believe the best in you. And so that's what I love about the way that we work here, is taking those each unique student and really pulling out all the gifts that God has instilled in them.
All of the best parts. I like that you said that, because people can be uniquely, they might be unique in the way that they cause trouble in your classroom and they get under your skin like no one else. But by partnering with the Lord and seeing the best in them, then you can actually, like, a single teacher partnering with God and seeing that student as the individual that he sees them as can change that student's trajectory
Dramatically. Like I'm just thinking about some feedback we've had recently from new parents and new grandparents who have shared emphatically, our child was like this. For instance, this one parent says, the child would come home, go right to her bedroom, and not have any interactions with us. Like, just was pretty isolated. Go in the room, close the door every day after school. And now, since she's been coming here, she comes home, she wants to interact with us. She's excited to tell us about her experiences and her day. You know, I've come across a lot of people too that I've interviewed about their own journey of learning, adults. Hey, what was your experience like in school? Did school equip you for what you do now? And what about your teachers? Did you have a favorite teacher, somebody that really stands out to you? And when people can talk about that teacher, they light up.
Right.
Their eyes sparkle a little more, because I know what's going on. They're recalling the teacher that was so attentive to let them know you have value. You're so important to me. And again, if a young person has that kind of experience, and for us having 2 teachers in every class and giving our teachers guidance and really direction to celebrate each child, let each one know that they are unique. There's no one else like them. And also build on their strengths. Find those things that they're good at, that they are shining, and run with it. Support them in those areas. I mean, it's just transformative.
So one of the things that Jessica talks about in the book, actually it's the first section of this chapter, she talks about this idea of a safe space. And this has been a bit of a buzzword in the last few years, I would say. We're seeing this idea being incorporated into universities in a way that I don't think really portrays what we're talking about. So what are we talking about when we talk about this term safe space? And how does this apply to valuing each individual?
I think when I picture a space safe in my classroom, it's like, again, it goes back to them feeling loved, seen, and known and heard. And so it's not necessarily like a go sit in the quiet corner and this is your safe space, right?
It's not go to the cry room.
Right. It's more of, I know that my teacher loves me, values me, and sees me, and is going to take time to understand me. And so it's not necessarily a space, but it's forming, but like a place where they can come and know that they are valued. At the end of the day, that's what it is. It's being valued for who they are and who they are created to be. And so then because of that, then they feel safe to share their ideas and their plans and their goals and their dreams and their hopes without feeling like you'll never amount to that.
Right.
Well, Jamie, you recently had a student in your class who was interviewed about her experience coming here. And if I recall, she said, or her mom said, that when her previous school situation, she felt disconnected. She lacked confidence. She just wasn't really having that sense of belonging. But her mom shared that one of the most powerful and impactful things that she saw happen with her daughter was that you sent a letter home with her to give her some specific things that what was in the letter? Do you remember what you shared with her that was so meaningful?
I don't remember specifically, but one of the things that I do, and I try to do every school year, at the beginning of the school year, and I'll get to the letter in just a second, but this, I think, will lead into that letter, is I pray specifically, usually the day before, the night before school starts, like, God, just give me one word for each student. For this student, I think last year, I think the word might have been worth. And so, God, I just want you her to find her worth in you. And I didn't know her because she was new, right? And so it was just like God downloaded that word to me. And so I was just praying for that. And then each year I give the students a Bible. And so I write that prayer in there for them. And so I'm pretty sure what I did when I wrote that letter is just reiterate that prayer that I had been praying for her. Like, the worth that you have is found in Christ. Don't forget that. Don't lose sight of that. You are loved and you are seen and you are known by God and you are loved by me and your mom and, all the people around here who love you and value you. And the cool part about her is that she is flourishing. She's become a leader. She has a huge group of friends. She is, she's doing amazing. So
She is. She's been getting up in front of large groups of people and singing.
yeah, leading worship and
Her confidence.
getting her testimony at churches in the area. It's
Yes.
super cool.
Her confidence is rocketing upward. I also like to think that one of the ways we give the value to the students in a practical way, we celebrate them as a whole person. And I recall that if I had 20 or 25 students in a class and my job is to deliver the academic information, I couldn't really get to know the children. Some of the children were having emotional challenges.
Right.
And that's actually very common these days. And those children, I know in some classrooms with some teachers, when this child's having an emotional tantrum or outburst, the teachers go in the hall, go see the principal. And that conveys a message to the child that you're a troublemaker, perhaps. But I love the fact that here, because we have those two teachers, the child's having an emotional tantrum or turmoil, one of those teachers can take the child aside and help them process that growth opportunity in a careful, guided way. And even in that emotional tantrum moment, the child still knows I'm important to you because you're taking the time necessary to help me learn how to do this.
Yeah.
And their peers help them that way too.
There's so many instances. I mean, I had several students flashing through my mind when you were telling that, because there's been times where I'm like, go ahead and go out to the deck. I'll meet you there in a minute. And they're fuming. And I mean, honestly, if I'm being honest, I'm probably fuming inside too, right? Like, because it's like the tensions are high from whatever reaction is going on. And so it gives us both time to kind of separate for a minute. And then when I go out, and I've had so many students say, thank you for just taking that time with me. And it comes down to, it's nothing that's going on in the classroom. It's something that happened at home, or it just might be their feelings of whatever is going on that they are reacting to.
So this idea of a safe space, like, why is safety important to people? And it's because I think we have all these built-in survival instincts, right? It's self-protection. And what is a safe structure? If you have to do it yourself, a safe structure is walls, right? It's a very rigid structure. It's meant to protect you. But when we do a safe space like this, where I can be myself, then our students, the ones that do have walls, end up a lot of times taking those down, and the ones that don't feel the need to put them up. And that allows room for growth, which is like you were talking about. Growth does not come from a rigid structure like walls. Growth comes from having that room to begin to explore and step out, and the risk of failure doesn't come with the sense of inadequacy.
Yeah, I like that one of our board members is Dr. Brad Robison, psychiatrist, and he will sometimes refer to safe space. The work he does is intense, obviously. He works with a lot of young people who are just going through the deepest types of emotional, mental turmoil. But one thing he also shares is sacred space. So it's one thing to be safe and know I'm going to be okay. But it's another level to say you can be completely yourself and you belong and you have value. We all need that, don't we?
It's a breath of fresh air, even just hearing you say that. It's like,
I'm like, oh.
Isn't it? You can be completely yourself, even when you fail, because our value system here is not based on your performance. It's based on your unique design and the fact that you are invented by a creator who knows you and loves you. And we're going to answer to him for even how we interact with you. Like it's the deepest level.
That you said two words. You said safety and connectedness, or connecting and connection. Sorry. And I'm reading a book right now that's talking about that. And so if there's one that is higher than the other, then one doesn't happen. So if you are overly safe, then the wall is up and you're not letting anybody in. So therefore you have no connection. But if you're overly connected and have no safety, then your boundaries are crossed and you get hurt and rejected. And so it takes a balance of having safety and being connected on the same level. And I think that's what we try to instill for our students is you're safe here and you're connected here, and having that balance so they experience it fully and not one versus the other.
right. That's good.
I'd like to make the point too, though, that the students here, I think we establish such a deep sense of safety and support, and you be yourself, and we value you, and we're here to support you. That they can really stretch as well within that context. So our students are getting up in front of their peer groups frequently, giving presentations, and then receiving critical feedback. So their classmates might say, "I think you could have done this better in this particular way." And they learn how to receive that too. And I think that is so essential, that young people are being guided and supported in a way that the things that are typically devastating and very difficult for people, for instance, criticism, that they're getting practice at that to understand it's not shattering you. It's not, it doesn't
To break you.
Yeah,
right?
it doesn't crush you. In fact, it makes you a better person. And the more you practice anything, the better you can become at it. That's part of the safety that we provide, is that you can do hard things and you can face hard things, and you are capable. You're enough, and you're going to be okay.
In our society at large today, when people think of, again, this term of safe space, or, this idea that, you can be whoever you want to be, this whole thing of like, whatever you want to do, whoever you want to be, you can do that. There is an aspect of that that is true, but it does not negate the necessity for guidance and support. And like you were just talking about, in many cases, criticism, but it's knowing how to take that criticism and understanding that it's actually helpful most of the time. And it's also teaching our other students how to give helpful criticism.
And it takes training in that, though.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of training. It's not easy. I mean, there's times where I've had to receive feedback from him and it crushed me, right? And so now I can take it and hopefully grow from it.
Yeah, and I would propose it didn't crush you because you rebounded right away. And I remember one particular time when I gave you some feedback that I think was important and helpful. And it did hit you pretty hard, but I remember you specifically said, I had to think about the fact that you really care about me, and I know where you're coming from, and then that allowed me to really process it.
Yeah, because then I knew that you loved me and knew that I had more potential, right? And that's what we hope for our students too, is like, I see you, so therefore I know that you can do better, and this is how I can give you that feedback to push you forward in that. So
Probably be a good question for Dr. Robinson to ask. Esteem. I think a lot of people think self-esteem is based on constant affirmation. Somebody always has to keep telling me how great I am, how capable, how awesome. That's actually not true. I think people are desperate for honesty. And I think we all know inherently that we have these weak spots. We have these areas that we already know we're falling short, we're not very good at it. And I think the honesty that we provide for young people to say, this area right here is a weakness, and that's okay too, because that's who you are. And the fact that God designed you with your own special set of strengths and challenges, that's a beautiful scenario, because I'm not good at something, but you are, let's suppose. If I approach you and say, John, you're so great with all this media stuff, would you please teach me about how you do this? What am I doing now? I'm actually in my weakness, I'm affirming you, and I'm also pursuing relationship. This is what allows us to now form something more meaningful. And then at some point there'll be something you'll see me do, and you'll say, hey, look at you. You just did that thing, and that's a struggle for me. So I think the idea that our weakness is not something to be ashamed of and run away from. It's something to be appreciated, celebrated, and honest about. Here's the deal, though. If we structure things so that everyone is expected to do the same thing, same time, same way, inevitably it becomes a comparative arrangement and competitive. And I'm pretty sure you're going to get the straight A on the handwriting, and I'm going to get the D. And so what's this doing to me is, let's say I'm 8 years old, and you keep getting these marks on your paper that show you're like straight A, and I keep getting this one that shows D, but I'm really trying. I just don't have these motor skills like she does. And then pretty soon I start thinking, what is wrong with me? That's where the shame develops, I think, isn't it?
It affects your whole perception of yourself.
Not only that, it affects your entire life journey.
Yeah.
There are adults right now going around carrying childhood shame from those things that happened way back then.
And it's buried so deep that it would take an excavator to dig it up.
Yeah, or it takes the healer, takes a touch of God.
Right. That's better. Yeah.
I think too, like, you said something that made me think, like, it's not that we want them to never experience criticism, or that we never want them to experience hardship, because really that's what molds us into what we're supposed to be. If we haven't experienced some of our hardship, then we wouldn't be who we are and where we are right now. But it's, what do we always say, we want you to fail well. And so when they learn to do that, then they rise above it, and that's the goal. It's not for them to, well, I'm never going to have any hardships. Well, that's not true. Like, we would be lying to them. So we have to teach them how to take it, respond to it, and then go into it with the growth mindset of, like, I'm going to come out better because of it.
Many times I've had some parents come here and say, my child makes straight A's, but I know as a parent that they're not really learning. They're not being challenged. And to me, if that child's not experiencing a good deal of failure on a regular basis, there's probably not a lot of fantastic growth.
Failure is a great teacher if you allow it to be.
Right.
And if you have the kind of support in place that lets you know your value is not based on your performance.
Right.
You can fail and you can appreciate the fact that you're learning 100 times more from your failed attempt than if you're always successful. That excites me. I mean, to me, when I entered education, I want to support children. And I just love the fact that we can be so intentional to be aware of how is each one doing in their growth, in their experience, and then we can just meet them right where they are. I think that is spectacular.
Something I want to add to that too is that I did not experience a lot of failure in school prior to college. My senior year of high school, I took a couple dual credit courses, and they were very difficult. And frankly, I found myself prone to just want to throw my hands up and give up. And I experienced similar things throughout my first 2 years of college when I was trying to land on a major. And I think that that's because I did not experience a lot of failure in school. So you have students who may struggle more with learning at an early on, and so it might hit them hard then. But even for the successful students, you still hit a ceiling to what you're capable of without having to learn through hardship and failure. Is this making sense?
It is, but I kind of want to add a little something from my insight and observation as a professional educator is that I don't think the traditional model of education is designed to promote failed attempts at something. I think it is designed to really reward and incentivize success.
Sure.
And so if you get an F on a paper, you don't usually, or on an assignment, you don't usually go away from that in that format thinking, yay, I really had a hard challenge there and I put my best into it and I failed it. Yeah, and I learned a lot from that failed attempt. Yeah. Usually you get an F on a paper, you shove it in a trash can or bag somewhere and you forget about it.
Hide it from your parents.
And you just feel frustrated because you think, I guess I didn't do very well. That's it. But I think when you have projects, when you're building, creating, designing, and doing something that takes all the different disciplines and it's kind of messy process.
Right. It's the process.
It's the process because throughout that process, you're failing certain parts of it. And then you have to like troubleshoot, you have to edit, revise, make corrections. And to me, that's why project-based learning is so rich in opportunity to fail. And
very real world.
It's what people do in their careers. Did you know that? Einstein, his teachers were always like concerned with his thinking ability because he looked like he's always daydreaming.
He's thinking outside the box, though.
Yeah, he was thinking like, what would it be like if I could ride on a particle of light? But same Thomas Edison too. Actually, that's another thing that is mentioned in this chapter is that many of the people that we learn about who were genius level inventors, thinkers, they had minimal formal schooling experience. Abraham Lincoln, 1 year of school.
Ever.
And was prepared to lead our country in one of the most difficult times in history. Edison made it through, I think, 4th grade. And the teacher said he's addled, basically to his mom, like your child's got something wrong with him, kind of. That was the implication. So the mom thought, okay, fine, I'll pull him out. She pulled him out of school and homeschooled him, and which gave him the opportunity to experiment and tinker and learn how things work.
That's cool because in that situation, his mom was able to value him as an individual.
Exactly. Yeah, his mom saw his value as being crushed, and I'm going to intervene. And I really would advocate.
I respect that.
I respect it too, and I think all of our parents across the country, if they're very attentive to the children and they see the child having their value squashed out, I would encourage, take action. Do something because it's not worth it.
I mean, it reminds me of when my daughter Josie came to school, right? And she had you for half of the semester because you were filling in on a maternity leave. And I remember her like coming home, and she was in 6th grade at the time, and she wanted to take everything apart. She's like, "You got a vacuum cleaner I can take apart? What about that computer over there?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." And she was just taking things apart just to try to figure out how they worked. And then she started learning how to sew and crochet. And I knew she was always a creative child, but there was like a whole new part of her had been unlocked because she had the freedom.
I love it. I do think the students that are under my care are just more important than I can conceive. And I often, make it a daily habit to pray, God, show me how to give them the best support in their growth journey. And I had some special experience in that prayer that I don't know how people hear from God differently, but every once in a while a thought will just drop right into my mind, and I think, I didn't think of that. I think this came from somewhere else, and it's an awesome thought.
Right.
So I'm giving credit to God for it. But this thought popped into my head as I was praying that prayer: celebrate them like I do. And I thought, how does God celebrate each person? And that really rocked my world, and it gave me something important to dig into for the rest of my life. How do I celebrate the people around me the way God does?
So before we jump into talking about what does discipline look like when you value each individual, because obviously that has to be on a case-by-case basis, which there's so much to dive into there, and we won't be able to talk about it too much. But you were talking about how God told you, value them or celebrate them like I do. And whether or not someone is a Christian, we believe that what God sees when he looks at an individual student, he doesn't just see that student, he sees their children, and he sees their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. He sees all of it as far as that goes. And so,
Their connectedness.
yeah, ultimately, the way that you celebrate this one child could change the world someday. Does that make sense? And so this is why that image of the ripple, of a water droplet hitting the water and spreading out is so. This has been one of your images. This has been something that God has showed you, and like we really can't even begin to grasp that. And I wish we could talk about that more. But let's go ahead and dive into what does it look like then, because a really important part of supporting children in their learning and their growth is discipline, because learning does still require structure. So what does that look like?
First, discipline is extremely positive. For any of us, if we expect to grow, flourish, thrive as people, we have to develop disciplines. And having a group of people to help guide us through that experience of developing good, positive discipline is what a gift that is. And you're great at it. I notice with you in your class, if there's a student that is becoming complacent or apathetic about what they're doing and how they're doing their learning, I've seen you just light them up. But what I see in that is that you're really giving them that kind of guidance that is, again, reinforcing their value. You're too important to slack
My
off.
idol. Right.
Yeah. So what are a couple practical ways that you lead in the discipline part?
I think the biggest thing is just accountability, holding them to a standard of what we know they're capable of. And so that could look like, just checking in with them on a moment by moment basis. It could be a daily basis. It could be a weekly basis. Again, it's case by case. Which student is it and who needs what? Some students are natural where they are just super organized and disciplined. So they will come and just be like, hey, I just need you to check over this. And, and then you've got the others that are like, okay, we're going to meet at this time because I need to see what you're doing. As far as like misbehavior type disciplines.
Right, because that's probably what most people think.
Right, when they think of discipline, that's what they think of. I think for me, I think because of the connection, I haven't experienced a lot of typical pushback. And I think it's because I have that relationship with them and they want to respect me and the other teachers in our room. And so when they have that honor and that respect, then the misbehaviors diminish because they want to please, right? They want to rise to the standard that you are expecting of them. There's times where I have had misbehaviors, and sometimes it's like, all right, go out to the deck. Like I said earlier, go out to the deck and we'll talk in a minute. And it's when I go out there, it's a conversation. It's not like you're in trouble. This is what you're going to do. And there's times where there's had to be, okay, we're going to take your computer for the week. It's all about like the consequence fits the crime. So whatever is, if they're doing something on their computer that they're not supposed to be doing, they're on a website that they're not supposed to be on a website, then I'm going to take the computer. And you're going to have to do everything on paper. Let's go old school here. Um,
And you mentioned conversation, right? So in the case that one student is maybe, beginning to mistreat another student, then you would.
right, having that conversation, setting up a time where those two can talk and I'm the mediator, having, those interactions. There's times where I have students that, that are super sensitive, and so you have to be sensitive to that as well. There's times where I'm like, okay, I always ask myself, do I need to coddle this person or do I need to like go military mode? And there's times where I have a couple that I'm like, okay, right now this person needs some love and assurance. And then there's times where I'm like, nope, I'm going to hold them to this high standard right now, and just real like, nope, straightforward. This is what you're going to do. And this is, the standard. So buck up,
And I think the fact that because you and the teachers here and the assistant teachers, everyone is so intentional to constantly invest the value into the students that I see you, I understand you, I recognize how amazing you are, I see your strengths, I see the importance of your life. I think because they keep giving those inputs, those deposits, so to speak, when they do have to address a behavior thing, the students are just so quick to respond respectfully and appropriately because they already know
Right.
you really care about me.
Right.
And that's something else I think that happens in the context of relationship. The best guidance, I believe, the best growth happens in the context of loving relationships.
I can remember a specific instance. Actually, it was John's first day last year.
Oh, that was a day, man.
He was
was
my
a day.
assistant for
Lice
the
outbreak.
semester, and he got initiated. But I had a student that I had for a couple of years. He was a sophomore, and so he was not treating the girls in our class kindly, and so I started walking over to him out on the field, and he knew immediately, and he just put his head down. And all I said to him was, "What do you need to tell me?" And he just was like, "Bleh." Everything came out. And so I was like, all right, how should you have handled that? And so it's these questions of just getting them to think like differently. And then, John was actually he was initiated really, he had a time to just step in and be like, as another fellow guy, like, you've got to watch your mouth. You've got to watch your actions.
Yeah.
And kind of hold him to that standard. And he knew immediately. And the consequence was he wasn't able to, there was something that he was supposed to be doing. It was like
some kind of field trip or something.
Right. And he wasn't allowed to go on that because of the actions, and he had to stay back. And then he had to talk and write a letter, I think, to those girls. But I told him, I always tell them, I'm like, I'm not going to tell you to apologize because it needs to come from you. I'm not going to force you to do that. But I want you to think through that. I want you to pray through that. And then when you know, if you know, and when you know, then you need to make that right with those other people.
You just said something that I think is so important, and I don't want to miss it. It's because it's kind of subtle, but it's a huge deal. When you discipline that young person or any of the young people under your care, and you start by asking, what did you do? What do you think about this choice? You're helping that young person develop the competency to think about their own actions and choices, their own thought life, and how they interact with others. You're giving it back to the young person so that they can consider it carefully, and then you're giving them inputs of guidance. And I don't think that's typical. I think the typical thing that happens because of efficiency, this is a disrupted thing that's happening in the classroom, and I don't want to miss this 3 minutes of learning. So usually the teachers are just like speaking at the young people. You just did this, scolding them, reprimanding them. But I love the fact that you take the time to process with, what did you do? What was the result of it? How could you do it better? And this is really developing self-awareness. I mean, how big is that?
And we start from a young age too with that, because my wife, Andy, she works in one of our first and second grade classrooms, right? And when she has students misbehaving, a lot of times, it's like, oh, actually, she had a student the other week who had like I don't know what it was. Maybe it was so we have a punching bag on one of our playgrounds, right? And I think there was a little girl who was just kind of messing with the punching bag, and a little boy came over and shoved it and just knocked her over. And so Andy was like, So she pulled him aside and she's like, "What are you doing?" And he was like, "I was playing a prank on her." And she was like, so then she had the opportunity to step in and be like, "That's not how we play pranks on people."
Wrong definition of a prank.
Right. And so at a young age, it's kind of cute and funny, right? But even then, you can see how some students will just see the world in a different way, and you have to help them kind of see, no, that's not really how it is.
And then in high school, we're training them to be adults.
Yes.
Like they are on the brink of going out in the real world. And it's like, okay, how are you going to do this? Like, if you talk to a girl like that, her boyfriend's going to knock you out, So, yeah.
I also love the fact that even you guys recently did those mock interviews, and then you help the students think about, how did you do with your mock interview? Was your eye contact on point? Did you give a good firm handshake and a positive greeting? Did you speak with confidence and hold your head high? You guys are so detailed with how you give them that type of discipline. I mean, I think it's all discipline. And if there's a young person who's just being slack in some particular way because of that relationship you have, you see it.
Right.
And you catch it.
Well, and they know they're not going to get away with it either because they're like, oh gosh, Miss Reese is seeing me right now,
They're not flying under the radar for sure.
So this issue that you were talking about a little bit ago with your student who was talking improperly to the girls in the class, stuff like that in a traditional setting where you don't have the relationship aspect, where you can't pay attention to the students like that, something like that would fly under the radar, and that student would have carried that probably for the rest of their life and probably learned that lesson in a much more difficult way. But now, because that student was able to have that addressed and you were able to work with that student through it and set those boundaries, like, this is not happening again, but I'm going to help you see how this wasn't proper.
Right. And I asked him, like, what could you have done differently? Because again, it's like getting them to critically think, like, okay, this is something I could have said in this, or I didn't have to say anything. We were just playing basketball, right? So, and I could be an encourager. So,
and you guys are good too about not only helping them think about what could have been better and how they might have made a choice that would have led to something good, but then you hold them accountable to do it the next time. And I think that
was
is
a
also
huge thing that we
Can't
did
miss that.
all year long with
You
him.
cannot miss that.
there. Here's something too I don't want to miss, and that is the relationship with parents. I know that when these things happen, you're in communication with the parents too, to say, your young person, your child did this. We value your child. We want them to learn the right things. And so on the home front, we'd like you to also share your perspective on this.
And
Help
his parents were
understand.
so grateful when I called and just kind of told them about the incident. And they're like, please keep us informed. We will hold them to the same standard here at home. And so.
And then that was very effective. I don't think we had
was.
more of that happen.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very effective because, and then he came, I think he came to you and said, please hold me accountable.
Yeah,
I don't wanna be
actually
that
he did. That's
person.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's all the time we have for today, guys. But thank you so much for being here. I hope people will take a lot away from this conversation about how we value each individual. And ultimately, we do believe that this is how education should be. This is how God created us as human beings. And we're excited that it seems like people are moving in this direction. So.
It does seem like starting with the unique idea that each child is formed by a creator who loves them in a way that is just,
Immeasurable. It's unfathomable.
you're more important and there's no one else like you. I think if each young person gets that message from the beginning and then throughout their learning, it produces wonderful
Produces world changers.
world changers. That's a good way to say it.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being here, guys.
Thank you.